Welcome, everybody, to the second day. Actually, it's the third day now, isn't it, of Borrowed Time? And we're kicking off here with three amazing artists. I'm very, very happy to introduce. I've had the good fortune to work with them over the last few years for the Dark Mountain Project. And so today we're going to hear a little bit more of their works. Often with artists, you only get a small caption, to describe what's going on in the image. But here, well, at least with Caroline and Tom, we're going to get a longer opportunity to hear all about their work. And then with Matt, about a piece he's written called Black Light. Caroline, I'm going to introduce you now very briefly. Just to remind everybody, do pin the various speakers so you can see them in a larger screen. And if you do have any questions, do add them to the Q&A section on the right-hand side, and then we can talk and discuss each artist and writer.
Hello.
Hi, I'm just introducing Caroline. So, Caroline, artists who works with wild forage materials and with ancient techniques, such as pigments and all other kinds of things to make extraordinary, very haptic, intelligent work. Caroline, over to you and Grave Goods.
Thank you, Charlotte. Good morning, everyone. I brought my grave goods, and there's things I would normally say about the things that I brought and the things that I'm wearing that are part of my work, the sculptural or physical, non-drawing parts of my art practice. But when I woke this morning after certain dreams, I wanted to speak differently about my work. So primarily I'm a drawing artist, and that means that I'm using oak gall ink, quills, I'm using brushes that I've made from feathers, I'm using natural materials almost all the time. But there was a schism, a real unbridgeable gap between what I make in my outdoor life, my bushcraft life, my ancestral skills life, and what I was making in my drawing. And there had to be a way to bring these things together, but it wasn't just a nice idea. There was similar schisms within the self, within my life, and within practice generally as a martial artist of many decades. There had to be a way. There had to be some sort of grand unified practice. I'm not really interested in theories. Some kind of practice that would bring them together. But I found that I was already making what I needed to be making, and I just had to look at things a different way. So whether it's garments that are completely covered with drawing, with oak leaves in oak gall ink, or whether it's the knives that I use to cut the threads of the things that I'm sewing, the deer skins that I'm tanning, the bark that I'm stripping from trees and turning into containers. There had to be a way that this could be my art, or I was in complete disappointment with both myself and art. And I'd been there when I'd left art college, complete disappointment with the product and the height of commodity capitalism. And it only wanted to speak of everlasting life, as capital does. It didn't want to speak about life and death and life, which is, of course, how anything is actually made. There was no compost, and there was no dirt, and there was no filth, and therefore there was no transformation. And so to bring in a good old British dirt and discarded detritus from badger sets has become my kind of mission. So there's a lot of death in my work. But this May, I almost died, and everything's really changed. There was a huge fire where I lived on a boat on the Thames, and the entire boatyard burned down. And I had to do with that. I was involved in that, and I was the first responder. And when I left and everything was 100-foot high flames, my entire studio went up in flames. All my work, apart from 4 years of drawings, one tiny set of natural watercolors, and these things that are here now, one sword. All my martial arts swords are gone, but the sword that I'd made for grave goods, which is a replica of a sword from Boudicca's tribe, the Iceni, which was found in the River Thames in 1996. So this is a cast from a mold made from it, which I fashioned in bronze, which I smashed from malachite and turquoise and added tin to and smelted with a great guy, Will Lord. It has an ash handle and some of my buckskin to cover it. A deer that I tanned with the marks that where it went under a fence and became scarred, as so many deer in Britain do, hurting themselves with all these barriers we put between fields. These are all that are left. All my slides are gone, all the music I made, all my materials, every sketchbook apart from the ones I was using. This really is kind of all that's left that was on my boat with me. But if it was on my boat with me, then it was safe. And it's weird that I chose the things that I wish to be buried with, to be with me in my boat when I was living, because I had just tidied everything and put everything away. So all my photos and every work of art I did before 2016 is gone, which is great, actually. So the work that I do now, I have to do. My nieces and nephews, I don't have children. They know that how I want to be buried. The burials of Britain for women like me, eccentric women wielding swords who like to drink and eat, we were buried with the things we loved: cups, swords, jewelry, clothes, daggers, baskets of apples, yew seeds. And I intend to carry on that tradition, if only to completely perplex future archaeologists, whether they're AIs or insects or strange race of beings. I'm here to, excuse my language, fuck them up. The humor of death is the only humor. Since everything burned and I lost half of my possessions, I have been a much more joyful person after the PTSD cleared up. So why am I here? To show you the next thing I'm making, a staff to cross a river. Last night I dreamt about the river, which was dry. And last night I had been oiling this, which I've been seasoning for about 18 months. So this is a staff that I cut in the forests of the Great Ridgeway in Wiltshire. And it's just been really drying. It's hazel wrapped around completely with a honeysuckle, which of course was trying to kill it and use it to something to grow up. I've always wanted a twisty staff this good, and I've only had a couple and they've been short. So I brought this home from when I was living in the woods for a week. And last night I oiled it with British linseed oil, but the flaxseed, the ones you can actually eat as well. A lot of my materials, they're all non-toxic, but a lot of them, whether they become food or art, is just a matter of how I'm going to use them that day. So that's last night's work, and that will eventually have leather trims, and it will just be in my home. Sometimes they come on walks with me, these things. Sometimes they get used. This fox bone is where I keep, I haven't got them in there right now, but my needles for sewing buckskin. That was discarded in my allotment by someone who'd had a lamb supper and the fox had got it. And so these things aren't just talismans, and it's really important that the work I make is not for show. I can't sell it. It's just what I use all the time. So when I'm not drawing, I'm doing this, knowing that they're with me in my life, but they'll be with me in my death too. If there's anything you want to ask me about my work, please do.
Thank you very much, Caroline. I'm just coming. The coughing fit there. I've got the flu at the moment. I didn't want to flip that on everybody. So that's terrific. Look now, see, we've got a special link here with for the questions. To see if there was time to two people the question. I wanted to ask you a question. Your piece, Grave Goods, you wrote about, in fact, for the Dark Mountain, engaging with the material was a way of making incredible contact with the new aspects of our lives. I want to talk more about the way what you could talk about, what you find a part of the world system work like.
Unfortunately, I could almost hear none of what you said then because it was breaking up. I don't know if anyone else hearing that. It was like, I think I was trying to read your lips.
It's very, very pixelated. I don't know if you could type a short question, but I actually couldn't hear any of that. Just a sort of pixelated series of syllables.
I'm sorry about that. Would you see if I can do something?
If you could see chat, Charlotte, Richard's suggesting the best thing is to pop out and then come in again. That does seem to solve that. You solved it for me yesterday.
Could you just ask Caroline a question?
It's fine. I think through lip reading and through knowing what you might have been saying about the haptic aspect of things. So when a piece of work that I had in Dark Mountain a couple of years ago was 3 knives, one of which was lost in the fire. But this one that I'm wearing that I use a lot, that I forged from steel and pear wood handle with my homemade leather as a case. I didn't know it would become a neck knife, but it's the best place to have it when you're working here. This small, more sort of ceremonial knife, bronze with spalted birch, and the neck of a roe deer, which often is really hard to tan. This is fat tan with eggs or brain, I'm not sure which. And it's unsmoked, so it's very pale. And last of all, there was a really beautiful flint knife, but unfortunately it was lost in the fire. So I brought at least a flake from the same session when I was flint knapping. This one's slightly broken, but the 3 knives of the 3 ages, if you like, that certainly Britain has been through, many other places followed the same pattern before us. Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age. I was on a wonderful course where they were taking us through these things. You don't need much to be able to cut, and the sensation of working with these things is so different each time. To have things in the fingers that are so contrasting doesn't happen so much now. Everything is frictionless surfaces. The synapses in children's minds, heads, in their brains don't form because we don't have access to the haptic richness of our ancestors. We have a whole bunch of other things that are great, but we do not have the variation of things going through our fingers. And it's vital. It's like losing a language. So yes, to have so many natural materials for me is both medicinal, but also philosophically incredibly important. The impoverishment of the haptic environment for me is a real cause of sadness. So I spend a lot of energy trying to share the physicality of the natural and real world with young people, for instance, too.
I love that. Can I got questions being stacked? I'm taking advantage of the chair struggling with her bandwidth to just barge in. And thanks. I sorry to barge in late. Firstly, as obviously your guest came over from the welcome session, and I'm gonna be really presumptuous and like pitch a short Caroline Ross biography from knowing you, because I think Caroline and I first met at Base Camp Dark Mountain Festival in 2016, and one of the first things we talked about is that we're the same we're of the same generation of art school graduates, around, for me anyway, the late 80s. I'll stick to my version of the story, but that we also went through a similar, and you've just pushed back against this, Caroline, if I remembered it wrong. We went through a similar disenchantment from as British arts culture lurched into the 90s, and the kind of the shock and the ads, the advertising-based aesthetic of the 90s, and the Saatchi influence for those who are sort of were exposed to all of that. And then I remember an event in Bristol, something called the Goose something Centre, the Goose Barn or something, and we launched Dark Mountain 11. And I think, and you gave a presentation, and I think of that as when you'd begun this cycle of work, and you were off in the woods sort of stripping roadkill skins and tanning hide and doing that kind of thing. And you said that you'd rediscovered your work as an act of, but I can't remember what the verb was. Was it devotion? Was it? And I wondered what it was and how that's gone in the time since. Yeah.
Oh my God, thank you for saying that. Because my menopausal mind does not remember everything. And my memory was not the best anyway. It's always the now, the now. But yeah, I think I came down from, I was with Andres Roberts of Way of Nature and Paul Kingsnorth when we were teaching Fire and Shadow in Scotland. And I came down and did some deer skinning and tanning. And then I came straight to Bristol, and I was going to talk about my paints and sort of the things that are like this, which is homemade watercolor in a shell. That's ashes. And then I just went, oh, no, I'm a devotional artist. And I think I said, oh, I'm coming out as a devotional artist. Yeah, no, I'm still out, Matt. I'm still out and proud.
Fantastic. So that still works. Yeah, it works for me. Fantastic. Yeah. That's a lovely, it's not the most obvious and intuitive frame for what you're doing. And then when you say that, it throws it into a completely different register for me. And
well, it's devotion to Earth.
Yeah.
It's Earth. It's Earth. It's living and dying constantly, born, dying, reborn. What else could hold my awe? I'm so full of awe, and there's nowhere else to put it. So my art is devotion, my cooking is devotion, my Tai Chi is devotion, hanging out with my family and mates is devotion. Yeah, there's a proper grand unified theory for you.
Fantastic. I love that Richard tagged you under remembrance as well, because of course, you know, I think the link between devotion and remembrance that's invited by that, by sorting you into that basket. I guess that's really obvious with grave goods.
But what's interesting is that, briefly, is just grave goods, the person in the grave doesn't mind how they're remembered. It's the people who put the items in, the burials here that my friends and archaeologists are looking at. It's nothing to do with the person in a way, it's to do with the culture around them. It's a sort of act of devotion by the people who know them. By choosing these things, I'm making a vast joke. I'm not devoted to me. I don't give a monkeys. I'm a fool. It's hilarious that these things will go to Earth with me. I think it's just a big, serious joke.
I love the idea that you're, I'm going to go with messing with the heads of archaeologists. What did you say? You're fucking the archaeologists of the future. What are they? What is this? We've got an Iceni sword and a good, yeah. I'm being a bit greedy. Charlotte, who's really struggling with sound, has handed me the chairing role, which makes me feel I should be less greedy of the questions. And I think it's worth remembering, especially there's more people outside the room than in it now. So do feel free to just drop in a thought or there's a lovely, there's a habit of listening that many of us learned from the storyteller Martin Shaw, which is sometimes, it doesn't need to be a question, it doesn't even need to be an observation, just to repeat back anything that spoke to you, anything that landed on you. That's a good kind of listening exercise, I think. But it's not obligatory, so Don't worry. Yeah, Charlotte says she's done that a couple of times. What about, because I'm coming with a kind of privileged position of having talked to you over a few years and knowing your other work. And I was wondering if in your practice as an artist, you've got, I think of grave goods as going along as this kind of slower sort of drone underneath this kind of more fluid, the kind of work that's maybe, we're going to, Caroline's collaborated with me on the third piece for this session. But there's that side of your practice, isn't there? The kind of haptic in a sort of drawn mark making. Is there a kind of anything you want to say about the conversation between those layers in what you do?
Yes, that's a really good point too, that these objects here take a vast amount more time. There's a slower pace to making them, sometimes years. The staff will have been years. The bags and the baskets are kind of days, and the garments are usually months. And they're like an underneath sort of drone or lower note. And then the drawings are taking between a minute and an hour often. And there's that, that different speed and a different form of a different energy to them as well, even though the skills used overlap, and oftentimes the materials. But I notice I draw in a very different way for the grave goods. So when I'm drawing on, I just decided to wear it because I didn't want it to be just an object. But the oak leaves here that are all over this, I draw in a slow way, in a meditative way, either from the leaves that are in front of me or from photographs that I've taken in the woods that I frequent, the woods that I call home. And that's a really different way of drawing than what I did with you or what I do in my sort of daily or weekly practice, which are quite loose. And I learned a style of drawing back at, very, very young, where you are really attending. So for me to really attend to the exactitude of things is a joy. And it's why I mustn't do it in my drawings generally, because it becomes very tight. But the attending to what is a great privilege. So yeah, that slow and fast is definitely there. Thanks for bringing that up.
That's nice, attending to what is. Yeah. Thanks. And I've got comments. I don't know if you're seeing chat as you're talking, but
yeah.
Emma says, I was really struck by your talking about the sadness of haptic impoverishment and lack of touch, surface variety. It's amazing even to hear the name of all these materials spoken. Yeah,
isn't it? And isn't it so similar to for me, it's so similar to the ecological grief. Every time you hear a creature is gone, a landmass is gone, a moraine no longer exists, has been washed out, the glacier is no longer there. But it's the same with dialects and languages. Certainly where my family are from, the Doric in Aberdeenshire is barely known and less spoken now. It's an old form of Scots. Similarly, the textures, and in the Doric, there are many names for agricultural implements that no one knows what they are, no one uses anymore. And I feel like this about texture. I wish we had a sort of Zoom for texture. So this texture here is the buckskin that my clothes are made from, the oil tanned deer hide, rather. It's so rough, but yet smooth. You cannot buy leather like it. And it would have been commonplace in pre-Roman Britain for so many things to be covered with that. Handles, insides of shoes. And so the fact that people are sitting in the British Isles who've never touched deerskin makes me feel very sad. You need to go out and stroke as many things as you can. But the only antidote to this sadness is joy and fingertips. There's no way around it with words or thoughts. You just have to go out and touch things. Otherwise, you'll go into a form of grief that is to do with loss of touch. And we all know it from COVID already.
Yeah. Okay, that's very powerful. It's really obvious. I've just never heard of it. I've never heard it spoken in with particular reference to touch. Death of languages, death of local cultures, death of words. Those things are all familiar, but haptic impoverishment is like a new phrase I'm going to take away and be quoting Ross 2021. I skipped over. There was just a couple of other comments from Helen Ottaway. Caroline, you have such a lovely way of describing your work and life as all the same thing and all devotional. Yeah, absolutely. And from June Boyce Tillman, I find grave goods fascinating because previously these were regarded as useful in the afterlife. Your view is very different, but do they not in a strange way link a life beyond death with those alive? It depends on beliefs concerning life after death.
But this is really important, and that's a really good point. I was thinking of this only before I came to the table this morning. So if what your culture is thinking of as important in the afterlife is only, of course, maybe more beautiful versions of what is important in your life, the cultural life at that time. So the grave goods that were to go on to the afterlife with the person, if that's what they were for, because we can't ask them, we don't necessarily know. There's an element of assumption in that, certainly from the books about burial rites that I've read. But if you need it in the afterlife, it's because you already know that exists in life. For me, the veil between what I need in life and what I might symbolically need in an afterlife, there's no real difference. If it was important in my life to have knives, it's very likely that my culture would then expect me to have need of those in the great heavenly place where I'll need knives. So actually, they're just two sides of the same coin, and coins are literally some of it sometimes. So I feel like there's a shadow and light source aspect here, that this is the objects in the light, but the shadows cast from them are like how they will be after death.
Fantastic. So there's a sense with that anytime we talk about death, we're only throwing the shadow of our experience of life, and that's the only way we can talk about death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Could you always be there to just sum up what I say? That would be so great. There's in dimensional theory, there's a view that our 3-dimensional or 4-dimensional, if you call time, life is like a shadow projected from another dimension which has 5, and so on. For instance, the shadow of a pencil is a dot or a line. A line. A pencil is 3D, but the shadow of a line is a dot. I feel like death is the projected lit shadow of life. Nothing lost, just transformed, just shown differently, slightly flatter, slightly darker, perhaps. But we didn't mind being dead before we were alive. And I'm not going to mind being dead after I'm alive. That's why I'm laughing. But I mean, grief is awful. And I lost so much this year, and people I love too. And that's awful. And yet awe is the correct response. And laughter is the medicine. And connection. We need these death rites, and we need this humor, or we will all atomize and be sold drugs to make us feel better. It's just, we come together to talk like this, to reform bonds, to make a living culture, to use Dougal Hines' phrase, of what we've got left, what we can find. My stuff's made from detritus, mainly left around by animals. There's nothing special here, and the materials are worth almost nothing. It's the hours of care I put in that give them value. And I think that's the same with our future culture that we'll need in this time of grief. It can be made from just bits and bobs. the importance is that we create it together, and that it has that haptic richness, that it has a kind of radical friendliness underneath it, so that we can all bear these losses together.
I think that's a really fantastic reply. I love the way you've just dived into conversation and given this open space for us to draw this out in conversation. I'm sorry that we haven't managed to bring in everyone's voices. There's a really interesting observation and reflection back from Elizabeth Belgrano particularly, but it's all in the chat, so we can pick that up as we go, and always follow this up maybe in one-to-one chat or in later conversations. But I've got 1 minute to 1:45, so I think I should keep timekeeping now. So just massive thanks, Caroline. That was a lovely start to the session. And I'm going to hand over to Tom Baskeyfield, another old friend from art.earth and Dark Mountain. Lovely to see you again, Tom. And Tom's going to talk to us today about death of stories.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Really, really lovely to see you as well. And to meet you, Charlotte. I've had some interactions, and Caroline, that was really beautiful. And well, yeah, absolutely wonderful. I have a PowerPoint, so bring that up. Share my screen. Entire screen. Do I do share entire screen? I want to. Yeah,
I'd go for that. It makes it easy to see.
Yeah, I'm getting there. Sorry. Okay. Can you see that? Sorry, everyone.
We want to go full screen on our own machines. I was just putting into a comment, but I'll just say before Tom starts, as chair, I need to go full screen to see the PowerPoint clearly. So I won't necessarily see chat while Tom's talking. So apologies, I will check occasionally, but apologies if I miss an urgent chat. But if there's something urgent, you could always unmute.
Is that full screen now?
Matt, I can keep an eye on it too, if you can hear me now.
Lovely. That's much better, actually, Charlotte.
Yeah, I changed browsers. So I'm back. Anyway.
All good, Tom.
Brilliant. Okay, I'll start. Okay. So a note before I proceed. There are slides with text and slides without. On the slides with text, I won't be reading that text. I'll pause for a few silent moments for you to read for yourselves before I continue. And I hope that this space will be welcome and will aid your appreciation of the piece. So, death of stories, examples of life. It is hard to think about death when you have a newborn baby in your arms. By hard, I mean you don't want to. You don't want thoughts of death to enter your mind, but they are there. In fact, it's easy, painfully so. The fear of death has ramped up inside you compared to its flicker before that little life came out into the world, before his first cry, before your eyes met and your skin touched. Personally, this has been a polarized year of both death and birth. I knew it would be. The shadow of death hung with loved ones until the summer. Then my last grandparent passed away and a friend. Then, in September light, my son was born. This piece has been long in the making, but has been brought into shape by these experiences. What follows is a personal reflection on mortality, creativity, and spirituality through the lens of stone, specifically Welsh slate. In a small building situated low on a Welsh mountainside at the shore of a lake lie two almost identical slabs of slate. On closer inspection, one could deduce that these two slabs were once one, split. And with a little further imagination, one knows that they were once part of the mountain outside. The building that contains these bodies of stone is not much larger than 12 foot by 12 foot by 10 foot to the pitch of the roof, the size of a small garage or an artist's studio. It has two windows, one on either side, set into thick walls, It has one door centrally aligned. It is through these apertures that light is granted access. The air is still inside, but with the door open, one can hear the toot-toot of the small locomotive chugging alongside the lake and the call of corvids carried upon the breeze. Out there, the air busies itself. The difference between these two spaces, inside and outside, is palpable. It can be tasted. The inside space is dank and uncomfortable, but its quietness invites curiosity in a way that the outside does not. The dim light contrasts with the outside and lures you in. Once inside, you are confronted with the truth. These slabs of slate, this mountain body, were put here to hold the bodies of men who had suffered the worst that the mountain and their interactions with it could inflict. These slabs of stone are stone for the dead, interim resting places before depths of the earth or vapor in the sky. I encountered this small mortuary a few years ago, working on a project to do with Welsh slate. Of Flesh and Stone, as the project was titled, was a glimpse of the slate industry in North Wales and its legacy in the 21st century. My part in the project was primarily the creation of portraits of stone, as I saw them, fragments of slate captured in paper using graphite to create a relief of their faces. These shards of stone ranged in size from ones that could fit comfortably in the hand and pocket, to ones that required a backpack to carry, to ones which couldn't be moved by hand and body alone. All except the latter found a place in the project. The latter was a rubbing made of one of these mortuary slabs. Four years ago, I spent 2 days in the Dinorwich Quarry Hospital mortuary in Nantperis, making a rubbing of the left-hand slab. The summer before that, Mary Popham, my friend and collaborator, and I had spent a few days in North Wales researching. From the very beginning of the project, the subject of death seemed unescapable. It lingered as a shadow cast over all we touched and encountered. One cannot walk the quarries and mines of North Wales without hearing about and feeling the fate of men, and their fate is echoed to the fate of the mountains. This fate is reverberated through the literature of the area. In One Moonlit Night by Caradoc Pritchard, for example, and Feet in Chains, as we have just read, by Kate Roberts, death, absence, and void abound. In the towns we visited, most notably Bethesda and Blaenau-Ffestiniog, we were drawn to the graveyards. Headstones of slate, earth body representing human body, the elegant scroll of the stone carver's chisel illuminating the names of the deceased and the place of death. For example, Henry Sethas, who died in Mynoffer Slate Quarry on Friday, February 27th, 1880. And 2, the profession, David Rowlands, Plate Layer, Welsh Slate Quarry. The stone marking life and death, the stone as life and the bringer of death. The rubbing of the mortuary slab was a big undertaking. It took 4 hours to prime the paper with graphite. It then took at least 10 hours in the mortuary to capture the subtle marks of the dressed slab in the paper. I had found through working on other pieces of slate that this stone had an elusive quality. It didn't really give itself to the process. It held on to its secrets. Lines and fine lamination that appeared prominent to eye and touch failed to register in the veil of paper. The mortuary slab was no exception. On finishing the rubbing, we rolled it up and loaded it into the car. I didn't really feel a sense of achievement in completion of the work. It was a weight to bear. I may even have felt slightly deflated as we left the mountains for home, but I don't clearly remember. The mortuary had lured me in, but perhaps I'd been with death for too long. In the bright sun of summer, death could be lightly held, but in the depths of autumn, its demands were greater. Throughout the winter that followed, the rubbing of the slab hung unfinished on the studio wall. It was too big to be framed along with the other pieces, and in the following summer it was rolled up and stored securely in a robust tube, its fate question marked. Then COVID-19. At the end of the first lockdown, emergency homeschooling concluded for my daughter and I. A little time opened up. I recall that to be reminded of our mortality that spring and summer, in the bright light of our all life-giving sun, was most profound. My response was to unroll the slab and hang it once again and to finish it. The finishing was to paint around the rubbing with black pigment, a process of contrast, light and dark, luminosity and absorption, positive and negative, body and void. I then mounted it and created a tray frame in oak for it to lie in, a resting place. But I was still unsure of it. It appeared to have life, but what was it saying? Rocks are not nouns but verbs, expresses geologist Monsieur Biernerud, a view which is counter, by and large, to our cultural consideration of stone. We use it to build things and to mark what we wish to imbue with longevity, dare I say, permanence. It is used in the construction of homes, churches, schools. It is used to remember the dead. Biernerud is highlighting in her statement the forces of Earth, volcanic eruptions, coral reef accretion, mountain range building, the latter of which North Wales went through with vast creativity. She is also speaking of the weathering and abrasive effects of water, ice, wind, and stone itself. We can see the evidence of the macro scale of geological processes in the micro scale of a gravestone. Slate is particularly tough, impervious to weathering, hence its use as a roofing stone. But still, once water seeps in between the laminations, frost thaw action claims its space, and the stone begins to crack, crumble, and flake. The evolution of various forms of matter into stone is a continual creative event. The human interaction with stone could be seen to be part of this process. Jeffrey Jerome Cohen offers a great insight into creating art with stone. He sees it not as human dominance, but as a human lithic collaboration. The artist is not aiming to domesticate this earthly element, he claims, but is rather working to make manifest the art that stone already holds. Further, he suggests that stone is a great medium for the mind, as it invites us to think beyond the circumscriptions of small categories, to explore interrelations and ecological interpenetrations, to delve, to make. It is a catalyst for human expression and creation, then, matter that takes us beyond our human time frame, guiding us, if we allow it, through, as he says, a temporality in which the flow of years is slowed to epochal progression. Geology is a lens through which we transcend the limits of our human experience. Following this vein, he illuminates the hidden depths of stone which present themselves through the sustained interaction, enabling, he suggests, the long transmission of messages with which it has been entrusted. A truly intriguing statement. Here Cohen is referring to something as clearly worked and specific as a hand axe, cut, shaped and polished over many, many hours. Messages transmitted then from stone to human over a great duration of intimate interaction. But what about a mortuary slab? And what about a rubbing taken from a mortuary slab? Incised, painted, dressed, arranged, stone is that with which we form alliance to transmit enduring meaning. Cohen gushes. Enduring meaning, a further statement to the mysteries embedded in stone. The mortuary slab is a piece of mountain body skillfully shaped by men. It is the mountain held at a specific moment of its existence. Detached, like all the other forms of the mountain that had been given through human endeavor. It has a narrative now separate from its home body bedrock. The rubbing of the slab is a record of this. What of the messages it holds? What of its enduring meaning? To try to answer some of the questions above, I installed the rubbing of the slab in my studio and invited people to view it. A movement specialist saw in the shimmering waves, creases and cuts of the graphite and paper echoes of the human body. An anthropologist expressed feelings similar to those he had experienced viewing rock art in North Africa. And a poet and dancer was taken back to her research into glaciers and mused on the deep time of ice, fossils and rock. We talked also, of course, about its native context, its coming into being as stone for the dead. In these moments, the rubbing became a doorway, an entrance into human expression, its messages being those to which the viewer was receptive, and in turn, fellow viewers tuning in to the stories, experiences, and interpretations of others through the act of sharing. The human-lithic collaboration was perhaps different for the quarrymen, who were in the business of domesticating stone. The mountain was to be prized apart to create roofing slates for homes and industry, and to provide elements for other building needs. The wilds of the mountain were tamed to a degree by the hunger of the industrial project. But these men also made objects of beauty, honing their skills in the production of ornate fans or carving blocks of slate for decorative effect. I wonder about the messages the men may have received from their time with the stone. What insights did the slate and the mountain import? What knowledge of the mountain's life did the men intuit? What stories of the cosmos to add to those of their Christian God? Though each cleave of the rock from the face to the split of soaked blocks into slender wafers, what lessons did the hands of these men and their eyes and ears absorb? As my hand glided over the slab with a stick of soft graphite, feeling my way, pushing the paper into dents, gashes, and chips, these questions were present. Each blemish on the rock's face a memory, a story, a record of something, a transmission of enduring meaning which my senses were not fully tuned to receive. In the midst of life, we are in death. 5 years ago, my brother-in-law John died. He had leukemia. He was diagnosed 2 days after his daughter was born and died a month before she turned 1. He had just turned 33. Just over 20 years ago, in August of 2001, my stepmother Hilary died of cancer. She left behind my father, a younger brother and sister. They were 18 and 16. She was 48. In August this year, my grandmother May died, last of my grandparents. She was 93. And before her, in July, my friend Andrew, who died of cancer, he was 43. We met through friendship of our daughters. Reflecting on the slab in winter of this year brought my experience of death to the fore. My most profound experience was the passing of my stepmother. I was 21 when Hilary died. She had known me my whole life, but we weren't particularly close. My older brother and I feel, for the most part, were unwanted complexities. But toward the end of her life, there was warmth, and I'm sure we would have been friends had she survived. I went to see her body in the Chapel of Rest. Unlike when I went to see my grandpa, who had died some years before, I had a profound awareness that Hilary wasn't there anymore, but something was. Her body looked like her, but her presence was elsewhere, her spirit, her soul, transported. Having been raised in a secular home, with science having the answer, reductionism and reason the root, I had no place to put my intuition. Hilary wasn't in heaven, as I didn't believe in such a place, but she hadn't just gone. She was somewhere, everywhere perhaps. She was in me, I realized, in my brothers and my sister, in my dad, in all who knew her. What I felt was that she lived on through our sharing of her memory with others. This memory contained her soul, perhaps. Death, it appeared to me then, was not complete finality. Death, it appears to me now, is process. I have in recent years been drawn to different spiritual traditions to find context for this intuition. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Zen master, calmly teaches no birth, no death. From the perspective of his tradition of Buddhism, we are in a cycle of perpetual presence. In this presence, all is in motion, fluid. It doesn't cease, it transforms. He speaks of historical truth and ultimate truth. It is common to view life in the prior context, historical, where we are born, we live our life, and we die. We have been, and now we have gone, never to return. In the latter context, the ultimate, he pledges with insight through meditation and contemplation that we can see that we are part of the ever-expanding universe, where there is no birth and no death. We are the continuation of our parents, ancestors, stars, moons, sun, rivers, and mountains, he exclaims. We are the world. We are the cosmos. We emerge then from the mystery of the universe and we return to it. The human soul is the soul of the world, the soul of the cosmos. In the Irish Celtic tradition, one might see the human soul more vividly as the presence of the person it has left through death. Perhaps the quarryman may have viewed it like this. It might linger around the living, not transformed back into the cosmos in quite the way illustrated above, but it is eternal all the same. In contrast to the no birth, no death of Zen Buddhism, John O'Donoghue sees death as something more manifest. Death, he declares, is a secret companion, one who shadows our every thought and feeling, one who is with us from birth, and one who, he declares, in our contemporary culture, we are willfully, to our detriment, ignoring. But as difficult and painful as death of a loved one is, death doesn't appear to be an enemy. It is part of life and not one that can be avoided. Both Thich Nhat Hanh and O'Donoghue agree that all fear stems from the fear of death, which O'Donoghue cites as stemming from separation. When you live in a body, he says, you are separate from every other object and person, which is a great pain to bear. To love and create, however, he expresses, are secret attempts at transfiguring that separation in order to build bridges outwards so that others can reach us and we can reach them. The coming home of mindfulness, it appears to me, is an attempt at bridge building. The rubbing of a mortuary slab is a bridge also. Death is a great wound in each life, admits O'Donoghue. Yet this is the very wound that can lead to spiritual growth. It is the wound also, in my experience, that deepens one's understanding of life. I last visited the mortuary and quarries of Dinorwick in August of this year, the day after my grandmother's funeral. It was damp and muggy, and the roads from Manchester to Llanberis were busy and aggressive. The day before had been emotional, and I felt particularly sensitive to the pace of the traffic. I cursed the journey. On arriving at the Powderhand Country Park and turning off the engine, I felt a sense of relief. To acclimatise, I had booked a place to visit the National Slate Museum, a new COVID stipulation. I had arrived just in time. I had a brief wander, then a bite to eat, sat in the light rain. Beyond the square boundaries of the 19th century workshops, one is confronted by the great gash of the quarry known as Vivian. It's a breathtaking sight, awe-inspiring and heart-saddening in equal measure. I took my leave after pondering it and walked up to the mortuary. Unlike the quarry hospital, which now also requires booking to enter and was closed on my visit, the mortuary door is never locked. It invites light in. It invites life in. Although I was alone in there, I held my ancestors and my living family with me. I thought of my 9-year-old daughter and wondered what she would make of it. I thought of my grandmother and how interested she would have been to hear about it. And I thought of my wife who had aided me in the rubbing of the slab those years before, and of our then unborn son. I also thought of the men whose lives had been taken by the mountain and of the values they left behind. the ultimate human-lithic collaboration. After some time walking around it and re-entering it, I left the mortuary. I walked past the hospital and Vivian Quarry, the chime of climbers' gear reverberating from the deep galleries, and proceeded up the zigzag in the footsteps of the quarrymen. I went as far as the barracks, where I paused, and standing in the sturdy squat shells of the buildings, pondered the lives of the men who called these dwellings home week after week. I then proceeded into the quarries and pondered the life of the mountains. In the destruction that abounds in the quarry, the mountain scattered. Beauty is also present. Cohen's sense of the art that stone already holds is evident in the shards of waste and the rock faces exposed in the galleries. It is evident also in the rudimentary buildings of the barracks, splitting sheds and cabans. It is there too in the mortuary slab. Here the beauty is further enriched, perhaps, as the collaboration of human and lithic is at an extreme. Through the slab, the seeming permanence of stone and the deep geological processes embedded are brought into contact with the impermanence of human flesh. In this ancient union, we humans are made to feel small. We are placed in a broad context, beyond the human, and we are expanded by it. The light of this idea casts a lingering shadow, however, over the mortuary slab. The men who blasted the mountain, cut the rock, split it, and dressed it, all knew that they, or a friend, or a brother, father, uncle, or cousin, might end upon it. With this knowledge, I wonder if love and care went into its creation. The rugged mountain made smooth, a silken slab for soft human bodies, stone to hold the stories of the dead, stone as a mirror to life. That's it.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much, Tom. It's really, really. But the one thing I really get annoyed with this medium is that we can't clap.
Yeah.
It was just fantastic. I really, really enjoyed that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
Do you want to add a
I-
screen share,
it was
Tom?
just
So we can...
so much feeling in it.
Do I just, I'll click on the screen.
Yeah,
again.
so we can see you. That would be
Oh,
lovely.
yeah.
Yeah, there you are. Yeah, the contrast between the hardness of stone and the softness of your feelings about it was just this brilliant contrast. We haven't got a huge amount of time for questions, unfortunately, but one thing I wanted to mention, I saw in an exhibition, I think, of John Berger, that he talked about the menhirs, the stone menhirs of France, and how that they were left there. They were there as ancestors. They were there as reminders, as companions for all human followers. And I think a lot of what you were saying is that our relationship with stone there just gives us something about this, gives us this access to deep time. And I wondered if you had a minute just to talk about whether you had, well, obviously, I mean, you did because you talked about it, but if you felt that stone was one of our main bridges really to connect with deep time.
I think it is. I mean, for me, it started in the years that I met Matt, actually, at Falmouth University. I did a project in a field in Penryn, and it was the soil and the other life around there that drew my attention. But actually, it was one day in particular. The soil had been tilled, and the stones were just beaming, these white quartz and other stone. And it was that point, really, that my attention was drawn to stone. And then I'm from Macclesfield in the northwest originally, but live in Somerset these days. And then I returned to Macclesfield and was just looking at the dry stone walls and stone very prominent there. And from that point on, yeah, stone was this something that immediately takes us out of our human time frame and puts us in the broad context of the earth and then beyond. I think if we allow ourselves to carry on that journey.
Great, that's fantastic. Well, as I said, I'm afraid we don't have any more time for questions, but because I don't.
Can I throw in just a comment, because I'll come
You're
back.
allowed to, Matt, because you're next
I was
on.
like eating my own time, but Tom, I really love that the
Okay.
balance of sort of slow contemplation, completely connected to a particular place and substance, with the kind of real personal, tangible. It was, I could have listened for an hour easily. But I just wanted to say, Richard mentioned our friend Alison Hallett, and Alison's most recent book is from a residency at a geology department in Scotland. And it's called Tilted Ground, and it's a lot of found bits of writing mingled with her own poems, and it's really, and that also might be a residency you might want to cast your eye over, because they're a great department. They're geologists that love poetry, so there you go. It's
thank you, Matt. I will look into that. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you again, Tom.
Thank you,
Matt, it's over to you. I'm almost feeling I don't need to introduce you as one of the co-conveners of Borrowed Time, also artist and writer, poet, and many other things beside. I'm going to hand it over to you, and you're going to speak about black light, I understand.
I am. Thank you very much, Charlotte. So I want to say, firstly, that Charlotte will have heard some of this before. This is a re-edit of a piece that was published in Dark Mountain, and after an event hosted by Charlotte with Caroline and the poet Dom Berry, who I read on the first day, Dom and I got into an interesting discussion about hope, and I realized that my understanding of hope was quite different. And then I realized I wanted to go back to this, and I re-edited it largely in the form of adding a new section for Borrowed Time. So Charlotte, if you're wondering if this is just the same work, just wait till the end. And about a week ago, I approached Caroline and said, Caroline, I have this idea that I would love people to watch you drawing as I read. And Caroline did something. It's a wonderful impromptu collaboration. It was a first draft. We ran with it, and I'm going to stream Caroline drawing. I'd love to be able to give you the sound of Caroline drawing as well, because that itself is marvelous. But unfortunately, my voice is on Caroline's phone in the background, so that wouldn't work. So I'm going to have to play Caroline drawing silently, and I'm going to read over it. It takes 25 minutes, and if you're losing hope, it's in 6 sections, so you can count on your fingers. Black light. On ecological mourning, regenerative culture, and the tangled roots of the Black Madonna. But the sorrow is radiant, like light shining in the darkness of a black stone lying over the heart. Lodestone, mine red crakehead. What to do about it? Act now, because it's too late. Extinction Rebellion, August 2021. Like the book of poems it began life as a reflection on, this essay offers a personal take on the eco-spiritual, which I'm approaching here in terms of a particular kind of behavior, that of prayer, of the ways we might seek to accommodate prayer, as silent contemplation, unmixed attention, the web of our noticing. I mean here to be quite literal, coming at prayer as Alcoholics Anonymous might speak of it, a gesture which admits, in one way or another, to a fundamental inability to stand alone or complete ourselves in this curious matter of being human. In speaking of ecological grief and the Black Madonna then, the underlying question I'm propelled by here is what, in the context of anthropogenic mass extinction, might learning to pray help us to repair? And what might it help us to restore? For over 3 years now, Extinction Rebellion has offered an introductory talk for those new to its take on our collective predicament. Wherever you find it, the title and the basic pitch have thus far remained the same: heading for extinction and what to do about it. What to do about it? Among the replies to biological annihilation, which have blown through my life, one has us sitting in traffic, declaring ourselves in rebellion against an ecocidal social order. Another, clutching the dark mother's muttering garland, learning how to be helped. That other refers to itself as the Way of the Rose, an interreligious rosary fellowship with a subversive mission to reclaim this old grassroots mother devotion from the weaponized agendas she's been enlisted to of late. A decolonizing of the church rosary. Perhaps it's a mistake to entangle these two quite different responses to ecocide here. But here I am, entangled in both, as the deadlines sail past and the wicked graphs continue to spike. Wondering what we'll be doing about all this when there are no more years to pretend we have left. Wondering if it might be an idea to start jotting notes now for the reply to ecological unraveling we'll be reaching for then. Wondering if we may yet find a role for prayer in that, as we meet what modern civilization has made of our one wild and precious earth, and decide how best to spend our time here together. Caroline, I'm sorry I somehow flicked ahead with your drawing. Don't quite know how I did that. Dark River. We are as gods and might as well get good at it. Stuart Brand, 1968. An English Buddhist priest once taught me that in learning to pray, we learn to get smaller, to get lower, closer to the ground that supports us. Of the many valuable things which I've received from the hands of Buddhist teachers, that priest's idea of prayer is the one I hold closest. When we get down to it, all that we are and all that we value in this life comes to us as unearned gift. And what we cultivate in prayer is a grateful awareness of this condition, which is one of abundance, which is also one of permanent, radical dependency. If we understood prayer as lowering us to earth, coming back to ourselves not as gods, but as the barefoot, teeming mutualists we are, the question remains, who then do we imagine we're praying to? And what does it mean to address this gravitational interspecies who in personal, singular, rather human terms? I'd hazard a guess that the Black Madonna is the Marian icon most widely associated with the eco-spiritual. My present take on her owes much to the mystical confessions of the artist, writer, and Benedictine nun, Sister Meinrad Craighead. I've spoken about Craighead elsewhere, so I'm bringing two others here who've helped me to name why her writings on the Black Madonna and on what she came to call praying with images have been important for me. The New York-based academic Neela Bhattacharya Saxena observes that even our many atheist colleagues are often curiously clear about the God they don't believe in being a male. In her 2015 book, Absent Mother God of the West, A Kali Lover's Journey into Christianity and Judaism, she considers what this entrenched cultural bias negates, turning aside from the word goddess, as she does so, to speak of God the Mother. Saxena's reticence about popular Western notions of the goddess is rooted in part in her own Bengal upbringing within a Shakti tradition of Kali devotion. In place of an eroticized female counterpoint to monotheism's bearded overlord, Saxena offers our dark mother Kali Ma, the fluid, gynocentric matrix of her own Bengali religious heritage, the primal womb of all spiritual somatic experience. From this Kalian perspective, Saxena maps the eradication of the mother from the Western spiritual imagination, that long matricide which bears heavily on our present failure to be especially bothered about this culture's ongoing extermination of the living world. As many others have done, Saxena frames the Black Madonna as one local variant within this generic mother culture, which she imagines as an instinctual current confined by no religious border. In Saxena's Kali Ma, we meet, quote, the mystic river that connects the world's religious ways. A river whose dark surface mirrors our present and passing need in a profusion of sacred forms. All of them, as with the many Black Madonnas found along the leaky edges of European monotheism, peculiar, vernacular, local. Crucially, Saxena also presents monotheism's millennial quest for a totalizing singular truth as inseparable from its war on this ambiguously plural mother, and likewise its war on the dark, on darkness. Twin campaigns which eventually spawned the ballooning, light-addicted extinction engine of industrial civilization. The radical. Where Saxena grew up surrounded by Kali Ma, the childhood of US therapist and cantadora Clarissa Pinkola Estes was steeped in another of the Dark Mother's local compound forms, Nuestra Senora, Our Lady of Guadalupe. Drawing on the mingled Nahua Catholic heritage of her Mexican upbringing and that of her own immigrant Hungarian family, her 2011 book, Untie the Strong Woman, Blessed Mother's Immaculate Love for the Wild Soul, is a 400-page rambling love letter to Guadalupe, who Estes herself first encountered, much like Meinrad Craighead, as a young girl, through an apparition which saved her from drowning. For Pinkola Estes, the Church's association of Blessed Mother with a docile, obedient purity is simply irrelevant to the visceral compassion that she embodies. Nuestra Senora, as we meet her here, is a ubiquitous presence who arrives at the point of dumb need. The healing that this presence brings is neither a reward for good behavior, nor a thing achieved by skill or ascetic striving. While invoked personally, Pinkola Estes recalls that of the great many close encounters with Blessed Mother which she's listened to over the years, far fewer are a matter of human-faced, spoken apparition than they are moments of intimate connection with a reciprocal, animate world. Among the many things I've kept from Pinkola Estes' writings on Blessed Mother is a quite ordinary, unmiraculous childhood memory. In a passage on the Black Madonna, Our Lady of the Fireflies, she recalls her grandmother, Catherine, rummaging in the still warm ashes of a fire in search of the charcoal shard Madonnas, which she'd then plant along the edges of her vegetable patch. Presented with one such burnt mother, the young Clarissa improvised a bedside shrine for her, illumined by a jam jar that she filled with fireflies at each dusk, releasing them again when she woke. As someone who gets queasy around much Marian imagery in Western art, I find in this gift from the young Clarissa's Hungarian grandmother a provocative and sustaining icon, one that speaks to an innate imagistic mode of thought, rather than to anything specifically Catholic or even Christian. Something as ordinary as calling for help when you've no clear idea who or what it is you're calling to. And for Pinkola Estes, it's in this very act of calling for help that Blessed Mother is already at work in our lives with the black light of her compassion, an intimate darkness able, quote, to heal the soul of a person all the way down to the radical, to bless the cringing spirit with the deep blessing most needed for repair and re-emergence. A nurse log. Who knows what Extinction Rebellion's call to rise up against planetary murder might yet amount to? Whatever comes of it, among the movement's 10 guiding principles, there's one in particular which I believe will outlive this phase in the cascading processes of change now hard upon our societies. We need a regenerative culture. Regenerative culture, to my ear, the term offers a more pragmatic, tangible proposition than eco-spirituality. The slow, ground-level processes of repair, at once social and ecological, already at work in the vulnerability and intersectional solidarity integral to XR's notion of revolt. What if such resetting of our broken relation with the living world turned out to have more to do with hospicing this engorged culture's inevitable, terrifying implosion than it did with convincing ourselves we can still somehow prevent that, if only we can find and tweak the right eco-spiritual dial? With no guarantee of where things go from here, perhaps the sheer intractability of our predicament has a dark gift for us after all. As anthropocentric religion's bright dream of the human evaporates in the face of what civilizations become, what if ecological grief came to be understood as an undertow, drawing this prodigal spiritual culture home? Perhaps one measure of any regenerative spirituality in the decades ahead will begin with how well it enables human beings in recovery from civilization to navigate this gathering current of mourning together, to help them to inhabit it, and even to be realigned by it. In a 1947 diatribe against the soul-murdering machine consciousness of empire, The Vision of the Fool, the English artist and writer Cecil Collins suggested, like the good modern mystic he was, that Western religion lay like so many overturned goblets, whose spilled contents were now openly shared, even as the institutions which had once held them collapsed beyond recovery. My own preferred image for this regenerative collapse feels close to Collins's. Suppose the dying religion I was raised within were understood as a nurse log, a fallen ancestral giant, slow releasing its nutrients on the forest floor, from whose decaying body a thicket of adaptive cultures is even now emerging. Such new regenerative shoots might turn out to have less to do with belief or exhausted argument than with recovered behaviors. Behaviors which allow us to entrust our lives to abundance, to the unearned gift of being here at all. Or as Pinkola Estés might put that, to release our brief human lives into the reciprocal animate currents of Rio Abajo Rio, the river beneath the river, the patterning miracle within which our lives swim moment to moment, good times and bad. Whether the Black Madonna is understood as herself synonymous with that all-encompassing river, or as a makeshift ally through whom to negotiate its subtle currents, is a question I'm happy to pass on. What I meet in her compound, always more than one thing face isn't complicated, difficult, or clever. And the unhurried rhythm of talking to her each day has no more to do with a self-extinguishing path to enlightenment than it does with monotheism's desire-phobic purity. What that rhythm amounts to is a way of carrying on. A game, as her rose garden devotion has long been known. an unproven, intimate experiment whose step-by-step wheeling dance requires no particular opinion about who or what this is. It's not over. Our best thinking got us here. Alcoholics Anonymous, traditional. Among the problems that approaching ecological grief in terms of prayer might invite, I've touched on one. I've no wish to conflate the Way of the Roses' restorative queering of the Christian Rosary with XR's science-led call for a mass non-violent uprising. To enlist either movement to the other's priorities would no doubt do a disservice to both. Divergent as they may be, though, one thing these two experiments in regenerative community clearly do have in common is the rapidly deepening socio-ecological crisis to which they respond. The question of what will and won't change as locked-in global heating takes hold, and it becomes apparent that any remaining hope of even mitigating a terminal ecological collapse has been knowingly squandered, is one I seem to have got stuck on. And there's that overburdened little word which keeps coming up in this context, hope. So let's end with hope. In 2018, the climate scientist, Erika Siegfried Spangler, wrote one of the finest reflections on ecological despair that I've yet come across. The miraculous hope of climate realists. For Siegfried Spangler, aware through her own research of just how critical an emergency runaway ecological unraveling already is, hope remains an unchosen and unavoidable reflex, something innate to our still breathing bodies, and as such, inseparable from love. If you love something, she tells us, you hope. You don't even get to decide. However poorly we tend it, however fragile we think it, this hope thing will not, really cannot quit. We might feel anguish, but despair just won't stick because it's not over. Just over 50 years ago, the neo-green entrepreneur Stuart Brand came up with a catchy slogan for a new age of ecologically literate capitalism. We are as gods and might as well get good at it. What this culture's addiction to growth has inflicted on Earth's life systems since then, if we allowed the crushing scale of it to brush against us for a moment, would surely silence forever such competence-addicted market solutions rhetoric. Brand's puffed-up maxim calls to mind another popular phrase, one that's haunted modernity over roughly the same period of time, and one which might, paradoxically, offer us a better place to stand. Civilized moderns are not as gods. What we are, as is writ large in the appalling ecological record of the past 50 years, is fucked. And Siegfried Spangler's right, it's not over. For most of the global north, fucked is barely getting started. And any remaining uncertainty about this culture's lethal trajectory seems likely to desert us well before over actually arrives, whatever that turns out to mean. If fucked is what we are then, we might as well, we better had, get good at it. I'm not here to suggest we passively accept what's being visited on the young, least of all by praying. Far from it. Nor am I proposing that a sudden about turn is at hand, some collective last-minute epiphany. Least of all am I inviting the cynical shrug that we're fucked so often carries. But if nothing we do at a local or personal level will solve or prevent this gathering catastrophe, maybe the question to release us from deadlocked, numbed despair is not so much what to do about it, as what does rising up together change? And why bring prayer into it? As we rummage the heirlooms of bankrupt civilizational religion, holding each one to the dark glass of anthropogenic mass extinction, we might make some interesting discoveries about this being fucked thing. That in terms of what stifles or restores the human heart, an unprecedented emergency changes surprisingly little. That as we shed our depressed acquiescence in the devastation which empire's best and brightest thinking has brought us to, we find ourselves on well-trodden and well-mapped ground. That the turning around our own complicity in ecocide calls for is nothing new, but remains, as ever, ours alone to make. That this species of revolution takes hold only in fellowship and solidarity as it moves among traumatized, addicted, colonized lives, enabling them one by one to throw off the lethal spell to which they've been enthralled and decide how best to act. That, to me, feels like a workable version of hope. Cinder Mary, a lovely charred Madonna from my grandmother, one found in the fire pit after the flames had burned most everything, except this little dark holy woman made of half-burnt log. Our Lady of the Fireflies, Clarissa Pinkola Estes. Elsewhere, a cooling cinder Madonna, pressed into poor soil, whispers the garden awake. The tubers hear her furtive smile, begin to grow. We know the Father may come to disallow, as fathers sometimes do. Let's not speak of that. Charred little sort of Mary, fireflies round her head, tucked between green shoots, she breathes her black light into their swelling roots. And Caroline, after all your work, I somehow managed to fuck up the stream. And when I turned to look at it, it was about 7 minutes in when it should have been 2. So I don't know where my hand must have just tapped the line across it. So sorry about that, after all your work.
It's gorgeous, Matt. Thank you. And thank you, Caroline, too, for the drawing. It's really brilliant.
Yeah, we had it on loop instead. I can't do copy and paste in chat, interestingly, but I was going to share it because then you could play it in its entirety for yourself. But I think Caro and I might come back to that and actually edit it together in such a way that we could keep the sound of the drawing. I'm wondering if anyone's clever enough to take out my voice on the phone and then I can read over the top of the sound of your drawing. Because if I you can.
That would be lovely, Matt.
Yeah.
We unfortunately haven't got much time to ask you questions.
No, I realise that. Yeah, shall I stop streaming now? I'll come out.
Yeah, I did just want to say the one thing that was. Oh, have you finished your slot, Matt?
Oh yeah, all good. Yeah.
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 The one thing I did think was really that perhaps joined all of your work together there is that the response of artists, and particularly, and I think this is really the whole business of the whole symposium of borrowed time, is that artists are these bridges. They are bridges into an understanding of the black light, of the haptic intelligence, of the permanence of stone and our relationship with place and deep time and matter. It's when the artists come together and share all their what are often very individual experiences that it becomes more of a collective experience. I wonder if any of you wanted to actually respond to that and how artists in this very difficult collapsing time who work within normally within a culture that is not looking at any of these things we have done today, how you find that business of convening and bringing some other kind of regenerative culture into focus.
That's a very open question that I would think anyone here could answer as validly as me. It's also a lovely lead into our fishbowl later, isn't it? Because I think it's that idea that there are some things that are best spoken to in chorus. And, I'm aware that I use the kind of my Christian inheritance as a bit of a straw dog. And that's not, if that's what comes across, it's not quite drawn the full circle, because I'm in quite close relationship to it, really. Sort of edgy relationship to it, but I value a lot people who speak within it as sort of dissonant or curious or uneasy voices within it. And the book of poems I'm talking about has 3 different voices in it, and that was really important to us, particularly with the Black Madonna, that for me is a beautifully ambiguous sort of fudge. It's if she's a figure onto whom we put our present and passing need as kind of neo-pagan, green, 21st century, whatever we are, that's just completely continuous with what such figures have always been used for, I think. So there is a kind of, paradoxically, a sort of tradition in this fake traditionalism, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's the one thing I have noticed that the sort of, I don't know, the H word, it's more like the big capital G word is not always present in the conversation.
Yeah.
And it makes an awful lot of difference if there's a God or not a God when we talk about death and afterlife. So maybe, but as you say, maybe that's for later with our fishbowl discussion.
Yeah.
Caroline or Tom, did you want to say anything?
Yes, I wanted to bring in Caroline. Of course, I've not left her time to come in. I'm really sorry, but yeah.
I didn't know. I mean, personally, I didn't have anything really much to add. I mean, my mind's just going like that with the various threads that are weaving in and out. But I think for me personally, I work a job and do other things, and my art is this thing that sort of holds an intimacy with the world, whereas I might have to be doing other things to earn a living. The art is a way of engaging, and it's become more of a spiritual practice, I'd say, as I have grown as a person and realized that what we're living in is the ecological crisis is a spiritual crisis. It seems that we've got to this point of detachment. We need to move back in to intimate relations with the other than human world, and creative practice is a way of doing that. And it seems like that I feel that through Matt's, and I feel it through Caroline's as well, that something in that. I've been thinking, just one last thing. I mean, I don't come from sort of absolute Christian heritage, but I'm aware that I'm raised in a Christian culture. But I've been thinking a lot about religious icons over recent months after watching Tarkovsky's Andrei Rublev, and thinking about my art objects as some sort of having some kind of icon that isn't related to any kind of formal religion. Just the sense of having something that draws our attention to Earth and our place with it. And I wonder if all the art objects that we're thinking about within this context, in this symposium, have that as potential within their existence.
Yeah, art and attention. It is really about attention, isn't it? And my attention, unfortunately, is on the clock.
Yeah.
And I really would love to continue this conversation, but I don't think we're going to have time.
Maybe we can bounce it to later, because I'd really love to bring in Caroline's voice as well, who there is a background behind that Caroline brings to this that has been really helpful for me too. So, and people in the chat I'd love to talk to as well. So it's a real shame we can't go over to the White Hart for a Lafrague, but we're going to have to find some version of that. Thanks. Yeah. I'm so pleased your sound recovered, Charlotte.
Yes, sorry, I do apologise, everyone, for that sort of crack up. But anyway, it was a really lovely session, and thank you all so much for taking part. And look forward to seeing you in later, hopefully, in the discussion about hope.
Great to
Thanks
connect
very
and to reconnect. Thanks
Yes.
all.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.